Much of popular culture and the public's modern perception of the golden age of piracy would no doubt lead us to believe that piracy was very much a men's game. In fact, when the word pirate is mentioned, what enters your mind first? Likely it's the classic image of Blackbeard standing atop his ship in a tri-corner hat and a long flowing cloak, a pistol in one hand and a cutlass in the other. In fact, almost all of the most famous names in piracy belong to men. Calico Jack, William Kidd, Black Bart, the list goes on. Whilst the vast majority of pirates were in fact men, some of the most notorious and infamous pirates of the Golden Age were not. There are in fact around 100 known examples of women throughout history taking to the high seas to raid ships and sloops, some of which were captains who took control of massive fleets. Out of these 100, roughly 40 of these women operated throughout the Golden Age of piracy, which will be the focus of today's video. You may recall that we have previously mentioned some of the most notorious female pirates throughout history on this channel, but today we're going to be homing in on the Golden Age and the centuries either side of it. We will meet some of the most feared and notorious women that ever set sail across the waters of the world, unveiling the truths about their lives and dramatic careers. Join us as we take a trip through time to explore the untold stories of female buccaneers. Welcome to Walk the Plank. And Bonney. Without a doubt, the most famous female pirate to ever set sail was Bonney. In fact, she is the only pirate on this list that commonly finds her way into media summarizing the most notorious pirates across the entire Golden Age, and with very good reason. Anne was born in County Cork, Ireland, towards the beginning of the 1700s to William Cormac and Mary Brennan. When Anne was young, her family decided to relocate to the New World, North America, in search of a new life and blossoming opportunities. Anne reportedly did not take the move well, however. Her mother was quick to pass away, likely due to illness, when Anne was just 12 years of age. Anne became unruly in the wake of her mother's death and is believed to have been rather violent from a young age. She notoriously stabbed one of her father's servants when she was 13 and eventually would fly the nest and marry James Bonney, a sailor. It was then that Anne would meet her destiny. With James, she relocated to New Providence, a pirate haven in the Bahamas, where Anne became popular with a number of local pirate crews and captains. The pirates appreciated her temperament and tenacity, and it didn't take long for Anne to develop a keen interest in becoming a pirate herself. James would go on to take work as a privateer, whilst Anne left him to be with the famed Captain John Rackham, also known as Calico Jack. Together, Jack and Anne took to the seas on a stolen vessel with a newly formed crew. It didn't take long for the pair to gain notoriety, as they operated as efficient pirates across the Caribbean, where they would target local merchant ships and sloops. Anne was a very prolific pirate, having captured many vessels across her time in operation, which would likely ultimately be her downfall when the authorities finally caught wind of her. Historians aren't exactly sure what happened to Anne in the end. Several theories persist. She may have been captured and executed by the authorities, most likely having been sentenced to hang somewhere in mainland North America. Other theories claim that she was captured, but managed to escape and return to the pirate's life out on the high seas. Perhaps one day we will finally learn the truth. Mary Read. Perhaps the second most famous female pirate of all time was Mary Read, a pirate who was actually very closely associated with the crimes and crews of Bonney. It's thought that Mary was an illegitimate child following her mother's affair. She was one of 2 children born to this unknown woman, the other of which, a boy, died at a very young age. Mary's parents would initially claim her to be the late boy when he passed away in order to receive money from the other members of the family. Her parents would reportedly disguise her as a boy, something that she would continue off of her own accord into her childhood and through to her teenage years. Following a stint in the military, Mary would reveal her true identity and marry a soldier whom she met in Flanders. For a while, the couple settled in the Netherlands where they opened an inn, but soon Mary's husband passed away. Abandoning this life, she returned to her secret identity as a male sailor and began working aboard a merchant ship in the early 1700s. This ship was soon taken over by pirates when sailing through the West Indies, and Mary was faced with a choice. Should she abandon yet another life for the lucrative world of piracy? Mary subsequently joined the pirate crew who attacked her ship, who then sailed to Nassau. It was here that Mary would cross paths with Calico Jack and Bonney, ultimately joining their crew instead. Revealing her female identity only to her crew, she continued to disguise herself as a man and took to the seas with Anne and Jack on their piratical exploits. Mary and Anne became close friends, and Mary would ultimately go on to solidify herself as a loyal and efficient pirate within the crew. After the crew captured the sloop William from the harbours in Nassau in 1720, Mary and Anne were specifically named as enemies of the Crown of Great Britain and became highly wanted by the authorities. What happened next is shrouded in myth and legend, and the true fate of Mary Read is difficult to discern. Apparently, privateer Jonathan Barnett tracked down the crew aboard the William later that year, where they were easily defeated due to many of them being extremely drunk. Anne and Mary, however, reportedly fought tooth and nail against the authorities, but were eventually arrested. The pirates were thought to have been sentenced to death in November of 1720, but Mary and Anne were kept alive until they could deliver babies from ongoing pregnancies. It was reportedly fever that eventually killed Mary, whereas Anne was perhaps able to escape. Charlotte de Berry. Not much is known about the life of Charlotte de Berry, a pirate born in 1636 who operated around the coastlines of Europe and Africa. The first known reference to Charlotte can be found in History of the Pirates, a book published by Edward Lloyd in 1836. Edward's work was often overly dramatised, shoddily researched and plagiarised, so it's unknown how much of Charlotte's tale is surrounded entirely by myth and legend, or if she even existed in the first place. The story goes that Charlotte married a sailor as a teenager. Similar to Mary Read, she took on the disguise as a man and took a job on board the same ship as her husband. Charlotte was soon pursued by an officer who desired her as his own wife, when he tried to take her husband out of the picture by assigning the most dangerous jobs to him. When he survived, the officer would go on to accuse him of mutiny and flogged him to death. Charlotte refused the oncoming advances made to her by the officer, killing him in an act of revenge and taking a job as a dock worker. She was reportedly kidnapped whilst working on the docks by a merchant captain who took Charlotte to the African coast to marry her against her will. This captain was despised by his crew, for he was a violent tyrant, and Charlotte is thought to have convinced the sailors on board to rebel and kill him. Charlotte took command in his place as captain, where she turned to a life of piracy. Charlotte was reportedly a successful captain, capturing many merchant ships around the coast of Africa throughout her career. Eventually, however, she and her crew were shipwrecked on an African island where they subsequently turned to cannibalism. Among those eaten was a man from Charlotte's crew who had actually become her husband, and she was understandably distraught. When they were eventually rescued by Dutch sailors, Charlotte is thought to have committed suicide by throwing herself overboard. It's a dramatic tale and one that may or may not be true, but perhaps time will tell. Grace O'Malley. Grace O'Malley operated across the seas of Europe slightly earlier than the previous pirates on this list. She was born in 1530 to the O'Malley clan, who were famous for their capabilities as seafarers and sailors. A native of County Mayo in Western Ireland and the daughter of a chieftain, she grew up within the walls of the mighty Belclare and Clare Island castles and was educated at a local monastery. Grace was destined to become a pirate from the very start. Her family had long since ran practical operations on the seas around Europe, where they would plunder vessels and capture ships belonging to local governments and crowns. When she became old enough, Grace would start joining her family clan out on the seas, where she would begin raiding mainly on the west coast of Ireland. She wasn't restricted to these regions though. Throughout her career, she would sail as far north as Outer Hebrides in Scotland and as far south as southern Spain. It didn't take long for Grace to rise through the ranks as a famed pirate captain. Her ships were large and plentiful, and each one could reportedly permit 200 men to fight and sail on board. Not only did she raid ships, she would also charge them to safely pass through a certain area of water. The waters controlled by Grace were busy, and many vessels used them as trade routes between the British Isles and mainland Europe. So Grace and her crew grew wealthy from exploiting those who sought safe passage. She would go on to do her family proud. She expanded the business, becoming both a feared pirate and a skilled trader. Grace's exploits even gained her the attention of Queen Elizabeth I of England, whom she met with in the September of 1593 at Greenwich Castle to discuss territorial disputes. Grace's story came to an end when she died, most likely at Rockfleet Castle in County Mayo in roughly 1603. She's thought to be buried at Clare Island Abbey. Rachel Wall. Rachel Wall is thought to have been the only female pirate native to New England when North America was colonized. Born Rachel Schmidt in Carlisle, Pennsylvania in the 1760s, she left home at the age of 16 to pursue a life near the sea. From an early age, she reportedly loved the ocean, and with a desire to live alongside it, married George Wall, a fisherman with whom she eventually settled in Boston. Rachel went on to find work as a maid on Beacon Hill. This would not last, however, and the couple eventually turned to a life of piracy in 1781. Together they took control of the Essex, a sloop on the New Hampshire coast. This was to become their new life and territory, and the duo focused their crimes primarily around the Isles of Shoals. When they amassed a crew of pirates to join them, they became a force to be reckoned with. Rachel's main tactic in raiding ships was to wait for storms. She would disguise the Essex as a ship that had been battered and wrecked by the weather, and would then signal for help from passing ships. When a vessel approached to provide assistance, the crew would spring to life, leaping into action and robbing the fear-stricken crew on board. Over 24 sailors were killed using this method, and the crew managed to amass over $12,000. Had it lasted, it would have been a very efficient practical method. However, it wasn't to last. George Wall died in a storm in 1782, and Rachel returned to her life as a maid in Boston. Here she moonlit as a robber in Boston Harbor, stealing from both ships and people, making a name for herself as a skilled thief. It was here that Rachel's ties to the sea ended. Her career as a pirate was over, whilst her career as a highwaywoman was about to begin. Across the 1780s, Rachel took to ambushing travelers on the roads outside Boston. She got by, but did not make a substantial amount of money through doing this. Ironically, after all her practical exploits, it was a simple mugging that ended her life. In 1789, Rachel attempted to rob Margaret Bender on the roads outside the city. The only thing she managed to steal was Margaret's bonnet, which was only worth 7 shillings. The crime was reported in newspapers, and before too long Rachel was caught. She was tried before a jury on August the 25th, 1789, but requested that she be tried for her crimes as a pirate, not as a highwaywoman. At the age of just 29, she was found guilty and hanged for her crimes. In her final words, she broadcasted her forgiveness for witnesses who reported her to the authorities, and proposed her death should be seen as a warning to other young women wanting to follow in her footsteps. So that was a rundown of some of the most notorious female pirates across the seas in the centuries and decades surrounding the golden age of piracy. Whilst other female pirates have terrorized the seas throughout history, these women made a particular name for themselves across this time period, and have gone down in the annals of history as some of the most feared and respected pirates of all time. Piracy was most certainly a career for anyone and everyone out on the high seas of the Caribbean. Thank you for watching this episode of Walk the Plank. Please do subscribe to the channel if you enjoy these videos, as we release a new one every week. Cheers!